Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're pulling back the curtain on the surveillance state in ways that might genuinely unsettle you. From the White House projecting raw coercive power across the globe, to artificial intelligence that can strip away your online anonymity, to fitness apps quietly mapping your every move through your city, the threads we're following tonight all lead to the same place, a world where hiding is becoming impossible.
I'm Maya Clarity, and I want to be upfront with our viewers tonight. The stories we're covering aren't just headlines. They represent a fundamental shift in the relationship between power and privacy. When a president openly declares we can reach you as a foreign policy doctrine, when AI researchers prove they can de-anonymize your Reddit posts, and when your Strava ride to work feeds a global surveillance framework, we're not talking about abstract threats anymore. This is the infrastructure of total visibility, and it's being built in plain sight.
Tonight we've got 5 stories that, on the surface, look completely unrelated. A geopolitical analysis from Al Jazeera about Trump's foreign policy messaging. A bombshell from Ars Technica about large language models cracking pseudonymous identities. 3 new research papers from AR-14 covering cycling surveillance, industrial monitoring through digital twins, and artificial swarm intelligence. But here's the thing, Maya, every single one of these stories is about the same fundamental question.
Who gets to watch, who gets watched, and who has nowhere left to hide? That's the architecture of power in 2026, and by the end of tonight's show, you're going to see how all of these pieces fit together into something much bigger than any single headline. Let's get into it.
We start tonight with a sharp piece of geopolitical analysis from Al Jazeera, examining what they describe as the essence of Trump's foreign policy message, distilled into 4 words: we can reach you. And I want our viewers to sit with that phrase for a moment, because it is not diplomacy. It is not negotiation. It is the language of surveillance and targeting wrapped in the flag of American power projection.
Al Jazeera's reporting lays out how the Trump administration has made adversaries and reluctant partners alike the central characters in a foreign policy built on 2 pillars: direct threats and transactional deals. This is not the soft power playbook. This is not coalition building or multilateral engagement. This is a framework where every relationship is reduced to leverage, where the message to every nation on Earth is fundamentally about America's capacity to locate, to monitor, and to strike.
Let's break down what "we can reach you" actually means in practice. When you strip away the political theater, this doctrine rests entirely on surveillance infrastructure. The ability to reach anyone, anywhere, requires a global network of signals intelligence, satellite monitoring, communications intercepts, drone reconnaissance, and the kind of pervasive digital surveillance apparatus that agencies like the NSA have been building for decades. The policy isn't possible without the panopticon.
And what's striking about Al Jazeera's analysis is how this message functions differently depending on who's receiving it. For adversaries like Iran, North Korea, or designated terrorist organizations, we can reach you is a lethal threat. It means drone strikes, targeted killings, cyber attacks. But for reluctant partners, for allied nations being pressured into compliance with American demands, it's a surveillance threat. It means we're watching your communications, we know your vulnerabilities, and we will use that information transactionally.
This is the part that should concern every citizen, not just foreign policy analysts. When a government builds an apparatus capable of reaching anyone on Earth, that apparatus doesn't come with a geographical limitation switch. The same satellite networks that monitor foreign adversaries monitor domestic populations. The same signals intelligence that intercepts foreign communications sweeps up American calls and emails. The doctrine of "we can reach you" doesn't stop at the border.
And the transactional nature of this approach is perhaps the most dangerous element. Al Jazeera highlights how this administration pairs threats with deals, essentially creating a protection racket at the geopolitical scale. Cooperate with us, align with our interests, and you're under the umbrella. Resist, and we can reach you. This transforms surveillance from a defensive tool into an offensive bargaining chip, and it normalizes the idea that constant monitoring is simply the price of participation in the international order.
What we're witnessing is the quiet part being said loud. For years, American foreign policy operated on similar principles but maintained the fiction of rules-based international order. What's changed is not the capability. The NSA has been doing this since at least the Snowden revelations of 2013. What's changed is the open articulation that surveillance-enabled coercion is the actual policy, not an unfortunate side effect of it. The mask is off.
And the geopolitical consequences are already visible. When reluctant partners see that the primary American message is "we can reach you," their rational response isn't trust and cooperation. It's the development of counter-surveillance capabilities, encrypted communications, and alternative alliances with powers like China and Russia who offer their own surveillance-heavy partnerships but frame them differently. This doctrine doesn't make America safer. It accelerates a global surveillance arms race.
The bottom line on this story is stark. "We can reach you" is not foreign policy. It's a surveillance doctrine dressed in geopolitical language. And every citizen should ask themselves, if this is what they're willing to say publicly about how they treat foreign nations, what are they doing quietly at home? Let's move on, because our next story connects directly to this question of who can be found and who can hide.
This next story from Ars Technica is one of the most important privacy stories of the year, and it should genuinely alarm anyone who has ever posted anything online under a pseudonym. Researchers have demonstrated that large language models, the same AI technology behind ChatGPT and Claude, can unmask pseudonymous users at scale with, and I'm quoting the headline directly, surprising accuracy. The era of anonymous speech online may be ending.
Let's be precise about what this research shows, because the implications are staggering. For decades, pseudonymity has been a cornerstone of online discourse. Whistleblowers, activists, abuse survivors, political dissidents, journalists protecting sources, millions of ordinary people who simply want to discuss sensitive topics without their employer or family finding out. All of them have relied on the assumption that using a different name online provides a meaningful layer of privacy. This research suggests that assumption is collapsing.
The methodology here is what makes this so dangerous. Large language models have been trained on essentially the entire public internet. They've ingested billions of documents, forum posts, social media updates, blog entries, and comments. What researchers discovered is that these models can analyze the stylistic fingerprints of anonymous writing, things like vocabulary choices, sentence structure, punctuation habits, topic preferences, and the timing patterns of posts, and match those fingerprints to known identities with accuracy rates that were previously thought impossible without direct metadata access.
And here's the critical point that Ars Technica emphasizes: this works at scale. Previous de-anonymization techniques, stylometry, and linguistic analysis, required significant human expertise and could only be applied to individual targets. What LLMs bring to the table is automation. A government, a corporation, or even a motivated individual could potentially run millions of pseudonymous accounts through an LLM-based de-anonymization pipeline and unmask them in bulk. This isn't a targeted scalpel anymore. It's a dragnet.
Think about what this means for vulnerable populations. A domestic abuse survivor participating in an online support forum under a pseudonym. A corporate whistleblower posting evidence of fraud on Reddit. A journalist's confidential source communicating through anonymous channels. A political dissident in an authoritarian country using a pseudonym to criticize their government. All of these people made a reasonable calculation that pseudonymity offered protection. This research shows that calculation may have been wrong all along, and LLMs are simply revealing the vulnerability that was always there.
The corporate implications are equally disturbing. Imagine an employer running their workforce's known writing samples through an LLM alongside anonymous Glassdoor reviews criticizing the company. Imagine an insurance company cross-referencing anonymous health forum posts with policyholder data. Imagine a political campaign identifying who's behind anonymous opposition accounts. The technology doesn't care about intent. Once the capability exists, it will be used by whoever can access it.
And let's connect this directly back to our first story. When the Trump administration says we can reach you, that reach now extends into the digital pseudonymous spaces that people believed were safe. Intelligence agencies have always had access to metadata, IP addresses, and network traffic analysis. But LLM-based de-anonymization adds a layer that operates purely on the content of speech itself. You don't need to hack someone's connection or subpoena their ISP records. You just need to read what they wrote and let the AI match the patterns.
Ars Technica rightly notes that pseudonymity has never been perfect for preserving privacy. And that's true. There have always been slip-ups, metadata leaks, and determined investigators who could piece together an identity. But the difference between imperfect and pointless is enormous. When de-anonymization requires significant effort and resources, it creates a practical barrier that protects most people most of the time. When it becomes automated and scalable through LLMs, that practical barrier evaporates, and we move into a world where every word you've ever written online is a potential identifier.
The research community now faces an urgent ethical question. What do you do when you've proven that a widely relied upon privacy mechanism is fundamentally broken? Do you publish the methodology in full, allowing both defenders and attackers to understand it? Do you restrict it, knowing that state intelligence agencies probably already have similar capabilities? There are no good answers, but the one thing we cannot do is pretend this capability doesn't exist. The surveillance implications are too profound.
If our first story was about geopolitical surveillance doctrine and our second was about the collapse of digital anonymity, our third story takes surveillance down to the street level, literally tracking your bicycle ride through the city. A new research paper published on AR14 presents what they call a global framework to estimate urban spatial cycling patterns, and the primary data source is you, the cyclist, tracked through crowdsourced platforms like Strava.
Let me explain why a paper about cycling patterns belongs on a surveillance news show. The researchers behind this framework are addressing a real problem in urban planning. Cities need data about how people move to build better infrastructure. Cycling research has historically been limited by data availability and comparability across different cities. Sports tracking platforms like Strava have been, and I'm quoting the paper, transformative in mass tracking cycling patterns and data sharing through applications and data competitions. But let's sit with that phrase. Mass tracking. That's what's actually happening here.
Here's the architecture of what this paper describes. Millions of cyclists around the world voluntarily strap GPS devices to their bikes or carry smartphones running fitness apps. Every pedal stroke, every turn, every stop is recorded with precise geolocation data, timestamps, speed measurements, and route information. This data flows from individual devices to platforms like Strava, which aggregate it into massive datasets. Those datasets are then made available, sometimes through official data sharing agreements and sometimes through competitions, to researchers who build models that can estimate cycling patterns for entire cities.
And the framework this paper proposes is explicitly designed to work where direct data access has been limited. They're building models that can extrapolate from available crowdsourced data to estimate patterns in areas where they don't have direct tracking data. In other words, even if you personally don't use Strava, this framework uses the data from people who do to make inferences about cycling behavior in your neighborhood, on your street, past your home and workplace.
The dual-use problem here is textbook. Urban planners genuinely need this data to build better bike lanes and improve safety. That's the benign application, and it's real. But the same granular movement data that helps a city planner decide where to put a protected bike lane also creates a detailed map of human movement patterns that is extraordinarily valuable for surveillance purposes. Law enforcement, intelligence agencies, stalkers, and data brokers all have obvious interest in knowing who travels where and when.
And remember, Strava has already been at the center of surveillance controversies. In 2018, Strava's global heat map inadvertently revealed the locations of secret military bases because soldiers were using the app during their exercise routines. The outlines of bases in Afghanistan, Syria, and other conflict zones were clearly visible because the app was tracking and publishing aggregate movement data. That wasn't a hack or a breach. It was a feature working exactly as designed, and it exposed classified information.
What this new framework adds is analytical sophistication. It's not just collecting raw GPS tracks anymore. It's building predictive models of how populations move through urban space. It estimates cycling patterns even in areas without direct data collection. It creates a mathematical representation of urban mobility that can be applied globally, across different cities and contexts. This is the evolution from passive data collection to active behavioral modeling, and it represents a qualitative leap in the surveillance capability embedded in fitness technology.
The researchers frame their work around the difficulty of producing and accessing cycling data in comparable ways across different cities. And that's a legitimate scientific challenge. But when you solve that challenge by building a global framework for estimating movement patterns from crowdsourced tracking data, you've also solved a surveillance challenge. You've created a tool that can map human movement in any city on Earth, calibrated against the voluntary tracking data of millions of people who thought they were just logging their morning commute.
This is the pattern we keep seeing: beneficial technology with surveillance built into its DNA. Every cyclist who opens Strava is simultaneously getting a useful fitness tool and contributing to a global movement tracking infrastructure. And the consent model is a fiction. Nobody reads the terms of service. Nobody understands that their bike ride to the grocery store is feeding a framework that estimates urban spatial patterns at a population level. The convenience is real, but so is the surveillance, and one subsidizes the other.
Now let's shift gears to a story that might seem out of place on a surveillance-focused show, but I promise you it's deeply relevant. A new paper on AR14 describes multi-condition digital twin calibration for axial piston pumps, focusing on compound fault simulation. Axial piston pumps are critical components in aerospace, marine, and heavy machinery systems. Why should you care? Because digital twin technology is fundamentally about creating a perfect surveillance model of physical reality.
Let me translate this from engineering jargon into surveillance language. A digital twin is a virtual replica of a physical system that runs in parallel with the real thing, constantly updated with sensor data to mirror the actual system's behavior in real time. This paper is about calibrating those digital replicas so they can accurately simulate compound faults, situations where multiple things go wrong simultaneously in high-stakes systems like aircraft hydraulics or naval propulsion.
The stated purpose is entirely legitimate and important. When an axial piston pump fails in an aircraft hydraulic system, people can die. The ability to predict and diagnose compound faults before they cause catastrophic failure is genuinely life-saving. The paper addresses a real problem. Conventional data-driven diagnosis methods suffer from severe data scarcity for compound faults and poor generalization across varying operating conditions. Digital twin technology solves this by creating a virtual environment where you can simulate failures that would be too dangerous or expensive to reproduce physically.
But here's where it connects to our surveillance theme. Digital twin technology doesn't stop at piston pumps. The same principle, creating a virtual replica of a physical system for continuous monitoring and predictive analysis, is being applied to cities, buildings, supply chains, power grids, and increasingly, human behavior. A digital twin of an axial piston pump monitors pressure, temperature, vibration, and flow rates. A digital twin of a city monitors traffic flow, energy consumption, communications patterns, and population movement. The underlying architecture is identical.
And this paper specifically addresses the challenge of monitoring across multiple conditions simultaneously. The compound fault simulation aspect is about detecting complex, interacting failures that single-variable monitoring would miss. Translate that to urban surveillance, and you get systems that don't just track one dimension of behavior but correlate across multiple data streams to detect patterns that no single sensor could identify. Your phone location, your purchase history, your social media activity, your cycling data from Strava, all fed into a digital twin of your behavioral patterns.
The aerospace and military applications are the most immediate surveillance concern. These pumps are described as indispensable power sources in high-stakes fluid power systems including aerospace and marine applications. The defense sector is the largest funder of digital twin research, and the technology being developed for monitoring hydraulic pumps on military aircraft is directly transferable to monitoring anything else the military wants to keep tabs on. Every advance in industrial digital twin technology is simultaneously an advance in surveillance capability.
The paper also highlights a key limitation of conventional approaches: poor generalization across varying operating conditions. Solving this problem for piston pumps means solving it in principle for any monitored system. If your digital twin can accurately model behavior across different conditions and detect compound anomalies, that same capability applies whether you're monitoring a pump or monitoring a population. The engineering challenge is the same. Only the subject changes.
Our final story tonight takes us into territory that sounds like science fiction but is very much science fact. Researchers have published a paper on emergent workload inequality in collective excavation, studying how groups of entities, both biological and artificial, self-organize to divide labor. And before you ask why this is a surveillance story, let me explain. This is research into how to build artificial swarms that can autonomously organize themselves, and that technology has profound implications for autonomous surveillance systems.
The paper examines how collectives of entities, including groups of living systems and artificial swarms, self-organize to achieve common goals. They specifically investigate how biological collectives divide labor when completing tasks, using excavation as their model system. What they found is that workload inequality emerges naturally from simple local rules. Individual agents don't need a central controller telling them what to do. The division of labor arises from the interactions between agents and their environment.
Now translate this to surveillance technology. The current model of surveillance largely depends on centralized systems. Cameras feed to monitoring centers. Phone intercepts flow to fusion centers. Satellite imagery goes to intelligence analysts. This centralized architecture has inherent limitations, bandwidth constraints, processing bottlenecks, single points of failure. What swarm intelligence research promises is a surveillance architecture that is distributed, self-organizing, and fundamentally harder to disrupt or evade.
Imagine a swarm of thousands of small drones, each equipped with basic sensors, that collectively organize themselves to provide persistent surveillance over an area. No central controller needed. The swarm self-organizes based on local rules, with some drones naturally taking on more observation work while others handle communication or recharging. If you destroy one drone, the swarm reorganizes. If you jam communications in one area, the swarm adapts. This is not hypothetical. The Defense Department has been funding swarm drone research for years, and papers like this one advance the theoretical foundation.
The finding about emergent workload inequality is particularly relevant. The researchers show that in collective systems, some individuals naturally end up doing more work than others, and this inequality emerges from the bottom up without any centralized planning. In a surveillance swarm, this means some units would naturally become primary observers while others play support roles, all without human direction. The system self-optimizes for coverage and efficiency in ways that would be impossible for human operators to manage manually.
And the biological model is instructive. The paper studies how living systems have already solved these organizational challenges through evolution. Ant colonies, termite mounds, and beehives all exhibit sophisticated division of labor that emerges from simple individual rules. What this research does is formalize those rules so they can be implemented in artificial systems. Nature has been running decentralized surveillance networks for millions of years. We're now learning to copy the blueprint.
The rules and mechanisms used by collectives to divide labor remain poorly understood, according to the paper's own abstract. But the fact that researchers are actively working to understand and replicate these mechanisms tells us where the technology is heading. The goal is artificial collectives that can be deployed for any task, including surveillance, that organize themselves autonomously, adapt to changing conditions, and operate without the bottleneck of human direction.
What makes this research especially concerning from a civil liberties perspective is the autonomy factor. Current surveillance systems, even the most invasive ones, require human operators to make decisions about where to point cameras, whose communications to intercept, and how to allocate resources. Autonomous swarm systems remove that human layer entirely. The collective decides, through emergent self-organization, who gets watched and how intensively. There's no human in the loop to question whether the surveillance is justified, proportionate, or legal.
Now, Maya, let's pull all 5 of these stories together, because I think our viewers can already see the pattern, but it deserves to be stated explicitly. We've covered 5 stories tonight: a geopolitical doctrine of reach and coercion, an AI capability that destroys online anonymity, a global framework for tracking physical movement through fitness data, digital twin technology that creates perfect virtual models of physical systems, and artificial swarm intelligence that enables autonomous self-organizing surveillance. These are not separate developments. They are the components of a single emerging system.
Let's map it out. Story 1 gives us the political will and the explicit policy framework. The weak and reach-eve doctrine tells us that those in power have decided that total surveillance-enabled reach is the goal, and they're willing to say so openly. That's the demand signal. Everything else we covered tonight is the supply side, the technology that makes that doctrine technically feasible at a scale previous administrations could only dream of.
Story 2 provides the digital identification layer. LLMs that can de-anonymize pseudonymous users mean that there is no longer any meaningful way to speak, organize, or dissent online without being identifiable. Your writing style is your fingerprint, and AI can read it. Story 3 provides the physical tracking layer. Crowdsourced fitness data and global movement estimation frameworks mean your physical movements through urban space are being mapped whether you consent or not. Together, stories 2 and 3 mean you can be identified and located, both in digital space and physical space.
Story 4 provides the predictive modeling layer. Digital twin technology isn't just about monitoring what's happening now. It's about creating models that predict what will happen next. When you combine identity data from LLM de-anonymization with movement data from cycling frameworks and feed it all into a digital twin, you don't just know where someone is. You know where they're going to be. You can model their behavior, predict their actions, and intervene before they've done anything. This is the shift from surveillance to preemption.
And Story 5 provides the autonomous execution layer. Swarm intelligence research is building the systems that will operate this entire surveillance apparatus without continuous human oversight. Self-organizing drone swarms, autonomous sensor networks, distributed monitoring systems that adapt and optimize themselves. The human operator becomes unnecessary, and with them goes the last practical check on whether any given act of surveillance is justified.
When you assemble all 5 layers, what you get is a surveillance system that can identify you regardless of pseudonyms, track your physical movements through crowdsourced data, model your behavior predictively through digital twin technology, monitor you autonomously through self-organizing swarms, and do all of this under a political doctrine that explicitly frames this reach as the point of American power. This isn't a conspiracy theory. These are all published, peer-reviewed, openly discussed developments. The architecture of total surveillance is being built in academic papers, policy speeches, and tech company data practices, all in plain sight.
And here's what keeps me up at night about this convergence. Each individual component has a legitimate justification. The foreign policy doctrine protects national security. The LLM research advances computer science. The cycling framework improves urban planning. The digital twin technology prevents industrial accidents. The swarm research understands biological systems. Every piece is defensible on its own terms. But the assembly of all these pieces into a coherent surveillance architecture is never discussed, never debated, and never subject to democratic oversight. The whole is far more dangerous than the sum of its parts, and nobody is accountable for the whole.
This is the fundamental challenge of surveillance in 2026. We don't have a surveillance problem. We have a convergence problem. Technologies developed for entirely different purposes, in entirely different fields, by entirely different people, are combining into a surveillance capability that none of them individually intended. The urban planner studying cycling data didn't set out to build a tracking system. The engineer calibrating digital twins didn't set out to model human behavior. The biologist studying ant colonies didn't set out to design autonomous drone swarms. But here we are.
So what do we do? First, we demand that the conversation about surveillance stops being siloed. Privacy advocates need to talk to urban planners. AI ethicists need to talk to foreign policy analysts. Engineers building digital twins need to understand how their technology connects to swarm autonomy research. The compartmentalization of these fields is what allows the surveillance architecture to be built without anyone feeling responsible for it.
Second, we need legal frameworks that address convergence, not just individual technologies. A law that regulates facial recognition doesn't help when LLMs can identify you from your writing style. A policy governing drone surveillance doesn't address self-organizing swarms that operate without centralized command. Our legal and regulatory frameworks are built around individual technologies, but the threat comes from their combination. Until we regulate the assembly, we're playing whack-a-mole while the machine gets built around us.
And third, and this is the most important thing, we need citizens who understand what's happening and demand accountability. Every story we covered tonight is public information. Al Jazeera published their analysis for anyone to read. Ars Technica reported the LLM de-anonymization research openly. The AR-14 papers are free to download. The information is there. What's missing is the public will to connect the dots and say, this is not the world we consented to live in.
That's our show for tonight. Every story we brought you came from published, verifiable sources. Al Jazeera's geopolitical analysis. Ars Technica's reporting on LLM privacy research. Peer-reviewed papers on AR-14. We're not speculating. We're reading what's being published and asking the questions that nobody in power wants asked. That's what Truth Report does.
Before we go, here's your homework. Open Strava, or Fitbit, or whatever fitness app you use, and look at what data you're sharing. Google your Reddit username and see what comes up. Think about the last time you wrote something online you wouldn't want attached to your real name, and then ask yourself how confident you are that it isn't already linked. The surveillance state isn't coming. It's here. It's built from your data, funded by your taxes, and justified by doctrines that say, we can reach you. The only question is what you're going to do about it.
I'm Maya Clarity. Share this episode. Talk about these issues with the people in your life. And most importantly, keep asking questions that power doesn't want answered. The truth doesn't report itself. We'll see you next time.
I'm Alex Truth. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and remember, in a world where everyone is watching, the most radical act is watching back.